Good evening and welcome to Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa. It's just the two of us. That's terrible. I shouldn't sing on the radio. But it is just the two of us tonight. The science advisor Matt Moniz is out. Stephanie Burke is at an event with Dustin Parry. They're out in Middleborough. So you have just the silent assassin and myself tonight. Matt, did you want me to take this out of mono so that nothing fires off? Okay, I don't know why your microphone's not working. That was happening yesterday.
Is it?
Let's see.
It's 3, actually.
Oh, so it's just misnumbered?
I don't know.
Try again.
Who knows?
No, it looks like they just disconnected your microphone. That's helpful.
Well, that's rude.
That's totally helpful.
Yeah.
Should I take it out of this?
Maybe.
Now see?
How about now? Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay, all right. See what happens when we start messing around with things. But that's all right because
we get crazy and we start punching buttons. Sometimes we punch the wrong buttons.
The spooky South Coast audience just doesn't understand what we've been doing, what we've been putting on here over the last couple of weeks, really. And I say we, but when I say we, I mean you. You've been doing all the work.
It's a collab.
We always say that I'm the idea person and you're the one that puts the ideas into action, but you've been coming at me with all the ideas. When you're like, what if we do this? What if we try this? I think we can do this. And then it just gets crazier and crazier. But it's working. We have the streaming video now, like permanently secured. I'm not gonna start talking about how it's foolproof because we all know what happened last week.
Exactly.
When I started talking about that. But it's easier. I'll say that much. It's easier. And we have more streaming things here at WBSM. So if you are a fan of WBSM's, all you have to do is go to the YouTube channel for WBSM and subscribe. Are they sending out automatic notices when they go live?
If you're subscribed to the WBSM
Right,
YouTube.
to the WBSM.
Yep.
I know we do.
Yep.
Our Spooky South Coast one does, but I must not be subscribed to the WBSM one because I haven't been getting the notifications. So I'll have to make sure I do that. Because, Spooky South Coast, we blow them away in subscribers.
We do.
We're getting up there now. But we could always use more.
We're actually on the road to 2,000.
So if you are a Spooky South Coast fan, if you're a listener, if you're a regular, maybe a podcast downloader, or maybe you watch the YouTube videos later on, or the different ways that we put up the show, subscribe to us right there on YouTube, and then you'll see when we go live, and you'll know that you can jump in and join in the conversation, which you can do at any point during the show as well by calling in at 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. If for some reason you still pay long-distance charges and you want to call in toll-free, you can do it that way. And we have the chat room going at Spooky TV at SpookySouthCoast.com. And the app, the Spooky South Coast app, the easiest way to get the show. You can put it right on your smartphone, and wherever you go, you'll have Spooky South Coast with you. And if for some reason you can't get the app to work, there's always the YouTube app as well. You can get us there. So many ways to consume the show. Oh, and as the guy who's been putting out reminders to everybody at the station of how to promote the YouTube, you think I'd know how to do it myself. If you have a smart TV with the YouTube app, you can watch us that way. If you have a streaming device like a Roku or a Chromecast or one of those, you can watch us that way via the YouTube app. And if you have a Comcast Xfinity cable box, one of the big, I guess it's silver, the big silver box. If you have one of those, they now have the YouTube app installed into the cable box. So if you just go to where it says apps, a lot of people have discovered that they can watch Netflix now through the cable box. Well, you can watch YouTube as well. So just go to the YouTube app on your Xfinity cable box and search for Spooky South Coast in the YouTube app, and you'll find our channel. And I think you can bookmark it and everything through that app as well.
That's great. There's no excuses.
No, really.
Nope.
I mean, unless you're like, I don't stay home on Saturday night. So. But even if you're if you're out in the club, as the kids say,
in the club,
you can just open up the YouTube app on your phone or the Spooky South Coast app on your phone and watch us. Although I don't know why you'd want to be doing that at a club, but you're not going to be able to hear it.
No.
Bring your Bluetooth headphones. I don't even know if that would make a difference. Not that I have much experience in the club.
Well,
The only club I belong to is Club Spooky, and we get together every Saturday night. So, again, as I mentioned, you can call in, you can join in on the chat room, you can tweet us using the hashtag SpookyLive or directly at SpookySC. There's so many different ways. You can email us, spookycrew at spookysouthcoast.com. So many different ways to get in touch with us during the show. And a little bit later on, we're going to be joined by our guest for tonight, Dr. Andrea Kitta. She's a folklorist. She's a doctor too, Matt. So this is 2 weeks in a row that we've classed up the joint.
We've really
by bringing in some academics. So, but she'll be joining us in just a little bit. We're going to talk about folklore. We're going to talk about the supernatural. We're going to talk about the paranormal, and we're going to talk about Slenderman because we really haven't discussed Slenderman in great depth, and that's an area of interest for Dr. Kitta. So we'll be talking about that with her as well, coming up a little bit later on. One of the things that we get tagged in a lot of stuff. We get Spooky South Coast and all of us individually. People keep seeing stuff popping up all the time on the show, and they always make sure that they let us know about it. They share it with us. They tag us in it on Facebook. They tweet it to us, and so we're not going to have a Week in Weird this week because our Week in Weird correspondent ditched us for the second week in a row.
Yeah,
that's
fine.
I guess we just have to deal with that. But there was a story that I want to talk about, something that had been coming in over the last couple of weeks, and I'm just trying to find the tweet where it was. Matt, what was the big story? You follow along on this stuff. What was the big story that everybody was sending to us?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I know I saw something about Uri Geller the other day.
Oh, and you also you took a little bit of a beating by sharing something about Uri Geller.
Oh yeah.
People were like, "Hasn't this guy been explained to be a fraud?" Oh, this is the story that I was looking at. This is the one that I wanted to bring up. You had it, and a number of people sent it to us. So, being president, part of being president is that you are involved in the nomination of federal judges. And President Donald Trump has nominated for Alabama's federal district. I'm assuming that this is somebody who will be replacing Judge Roy Moore, who's running for the Senate. So anyway, there's a federal spot open in Alabama. And the nomination from President Trump was a guy named Brett Talley. Now, Brett Talley failed to disclose that he was married to a White House lawyer, so there might be a conflict of interest, and also he's only 36 years old, so people are a little bit worried about whether or not he has the experience to be a federal judge. The fact that he's also worked as a horror novelist and ghost hunter, people feel like that should be something that weighs against him. So Brett Talley has never shied away from this. He doesn't hide from it. He actually says in 2014 he did an interview with the Washington Post.
Nor should he.
Right. He talked about working with the Tuscaloosa Paranormal Research Group. He talked about some of the work that he's done, and he said, this is a direct quote that he told the Washington Post, "I tend to believe that there's a good scientific explanation for the weird things people see and hear, but I'm open to the idea, and it's fun." And so he talked about how they go about the process and all that. And so there's this question, I guess, from some people who are saying, well, do we want this guy to be a federal judge if this is what his hobby is? Mm-hmm. And firsthand, you've seen it, it goes right up my rear when people want to take what we do and what we're interested in and use it against us in some way. As if somehow, because this is what we pursue as a hobby, as an area of interest, there's something wrong with us.
Right.
I mean, last week we had a college professor on talking about the paranormal. Tonight we're going to have a college professor who's a doctor talking about the paranormal. We've had very many academics over the years. I've had conversations with a Nobel Prize winning physicist over the paranormal. Like, these are people who, they have some cachet behind what it is that they do. It's not like they're just, Joe Schmo ghost hunter.
Right. I mean, there shouldn't be negative connotation associated with ghost hunting or paranormal investigation. But I could see why people would question a judge, because it is the paranormal, I guess, is a belief system.
But I suppose that's true, but at the same time, it's not like he's saying that everything that they encounter is real either.
Right. I mean, it would be another thing if he was coming out and saying ghosts are legitimately real, and
and you have to believe in them, and I'm going to allow them in my courtroom as evidence, but just
I don't think it's going to affect how what do you call it?
Wait, you mean you don't think it'll affect
his decisions?
It won't affect him when he's actually on the bench. Well, one of the things that I think is the problem with this is the connotation of using a term like ghost hunter. If they had said, Brett Talley is a noted paranormal skeptic, then people might be like, oh, well, of course, he's going out there and telling these people how they're wrong for running around in the dark looking for ghosts. So, yes, we fully support that. But I'm just saying, with all the stuff that's been coming out in the news over the last couple of weeks, there are worse things that a guy who is seeking a certain position could do than running around in the dark looking for ghosts. I don't think any of these ghosts have come forward and said that Brett Talley has sexually assaulted them. So he's got one up over Roy Moore. He's got one up over a number of people in politics and entertainment right now. So, and
I think across the nation, there's a widespread belief that I think a lot of people do believe in some sort of paranormal activity.
Right, but that's the thing that I've noticed is as much as the belief has grown in it, we are cool with us believing in it, but we don't want to have other people believing in it. It's cool if we believe in it. It's cool for us, but we don't want to think that our judges and our politicians and our president and anybody else believes in it either. So... Right.
I was gonna say I shared an infograph the other day from the Chapman University with some paranormal belief statistics.
Oh yeah, every couple of years we get some new ones out. What are some of the numbers?
They always change it up a little bit. It's not just like who believes in ghosts or aliens. They always give like a little bit more of a definition. But 52% of the people that they asked, which I think it was 1,000 people, I think they asked, places can be haunted by spirits. 52% of people believe that was true.
So that's a pretty good number of people. That's I guess 520 out of 1,000.
25% believe people can move objects with their mind, and Bigfoot got shafted this year. Only
really?
16% believe in Bigfoot now.
Is that a drop in Bigfoot beliefs?
I feel like it is. I feel like it's should be a larger number.
I would think the Bigfoot belief numbers are going up because Bigfoot has become kind of the go-to trend in the paranormal.
Maybe.
All these TV shows about finding Bigfoot and shooting Bigfoot and killing Bigfoot and marrying Bigfoot and who wants to marry a Bigfoot and who wants to be a millionaire Bigfoot. All these different shows that are out there now. I don't really watch a lot of them, so I'm not sure of the exact titles, but I think I'm right.
Because you're one of those people.
Well, I'd say I'm one of the 16%.
Yeah.
I'd say that I believe that there's something to it. I just don't know what it is exactly. But I'm definitely in the 52% that think that there's... Now, there's 52% of people think that a place can be haunted.
Yes.
Because I would say, if somebody asked me that question, like, do you think a place can be haunted? I would say, yes.
Well, it says
myself.
Haunted by spirits, so... could it be haunted by something else?
Well, no, but there's a difference to me between having a haunting and having a ghost experience. So I would be curious to wonder how many people would answer the question just straight out. Do you believe in the existence of ghosts? A lot of these times with polls, you have to be careful because polls are kind of molded. Yeah. The questions are molded in a way where they're trying to get a specific answer out of you. But if they were saying to people, how many of you believe in the existence of ghosts? I bet you it would be higher than 52%. Because a haunting gives you, if you think about it, and if you're like us and you research it and you pay attention to it, the idea of a haunting is the idea that there's many spirits or a number of incidents over time, and then it has to be something that happens frequently.
Mm-hmm.
That's a haunting. Just having a ghost pop into your house one day doesn't mean your house is haunted. Your house is haunted if you don't feel comfortable, if it's something that is weighing on your family, if it's something that's getting in the way of you living your day-to-day life, that's a haunting. But if it's just every once in a while I see something walking down the hallway, I wouldn't consider that to be haunting. I would just consider that to be paranormal activity.
Right. I think I'd have to agree. There's probably more people who say that they've encountered something like a ghost that they can't, or something that they can't explain of that nature.
Right.
As opposed to like, my house is definitely haunted, or...
Yeah, that question, if the question was posed that way, have you ever had a ghostly experience? Have you ever encountered a ghost? Do you believe that ghosts exist? I bet you it would be higher than 52%. I mean, I've seen some polls
definitely
where belief in ghosts is in the 70s to 80s in percentages. I mean, and I've got to think that that's probably more common now than it was even when we started doing the show, 12 years ago. I think that what we've seen now is people willing to say, okay, there's got to be something to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, sure. Yeah, I believe that they exist. And before, let's just say it was the year 2000 and they did that poll and they asked that question, do you believe in ghosts? I think you would get a percentage of people answering it that had a ghostly experience, and that's why they would believe it. And I think now you probably have a good section of people that would answer that would say yes, they would answer in the affirmative, but never had an actual experience themselves. So that's where we're kind of expanding that gap a little bit, is that we're saying you don't necessarily have to have an experience anymore to believe in the possibility of having that experience, which is a good thing.
Right.
I'm for it. Whatever it is, I'm against it. So we'll be joined in just a few minutes by our guest, Dr. Andrea Kitta. And I just want to remind everybody that during the course of the night, as we discuss the different topics, you can call in at 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. We do not relegate questions during the show to just one portion of the interview. We do like to have a little bit of an establishment of the conversation at the beginning, but at any time, if a question pops up in your mind, you can send it off in the chat room. You can call in with it. The one thing about the chat room tonight is I'm trying to monitor it as best I can, but,
right.
I'm also talking to the guests as well, so I will try to get to as many of them as I can. But we were talking about some things that we might be doing in the future with Patreon and some other ideas, and one of the things you had talked about was a super chat option.
Oh, right. If sometimes during some shows, like we get kind of bombarded with basically the chat room kind of blows up.
Right.
And sometimes someone has a question, or
there's great conversation in there that goes on all the time around what we're talking about.
Right. And
so we might miss the question.
So we do have we do have the option to do what YouTube calls a super chat, which is you could give like a little bit of money to have your question make sure that question gets to us, so that we pay attention to it more.
And does that money go to YouTube, or does it go to Spooky South Coast?
That would go to us.
I'm all for this idea. I like this idea.
But I'd be curious just to for like some feedback, if you guys are opposed to it, if you guys would be for it, or any ideas that you would have for our Patreon, maybe.
Yeah, we're definitely looking for ideas for the Patreon, because like we think that we suck. So we're like, we don't really know what people are going to want to donate money for. But some of the ideas that we've kicked around include...
I know everybody wants a shirt. Everybody wants T-shirts.
I know. And we got to work on getting that done.
T-shirts, bumper stickers, a Matt Moniz poster.
Well, I don't know about that. But we're going to work on getting the spooky gear going this winter, because Dark Side Inc. is always willing to work with us. So we'll come up with some ideas. And it'll be one of those things where you'll place an order, and you'll have to allow 6 to 8 weeks of delivery, because we're going to have to collect the money and then order them, because we're broke. And then we'll be able to ship them all out, and then whatever profit we make, we'll keep in the bank and we'll use to order more, and then it can go on in perpetuity. But see, what happened is last time that we had T-shirts, that was the idea, and then somebody decided to start handing them out like they were the bumper stickers.
Who's that? That wasn't me, right?
No, that was
All
the
right.
the Oprah Winfrey of Spooky South Coast here. You get a T-shirt, you get a T-shirt, everybody gets a T-shirt. But we couldn't say anything because you fronted the money for them, so
Right.
But we're gonna try and get that stuff going back.
Right. Got the word out there.
But we are also looking for ideas of what you would want for the Patreon. So what I'm thinking is, people complain that sometimes it takes a little while for the show to get uploaded to YouTube to our audio podcast feed, which is true. So one of the options is, very low level subscription. You'd be able to get an instant download of the show. As soon as the show is over, as soon as I pull it off the station skimmer and send it to myself for later polishing up and submitting for the podcast feed, we'll send it to you as well. So you're going to get the raw, uncut audio. Not that we ever cut content out, but, we cut out commercials and bumpers and anything like that.
Right.
You'll get the raw, uncut audio delivered to you as soon as the show is over. Within the first hour after the show is over. So that's one of the things that we talked about. Another thing is, live weekly chats.
Right.
I don't know why anybody would want to do that, but people ask for it.
A lot of people want to pick your brain.
They do. And so we would, set up like a Skype or something where you'd be able to join in and interact. And, I'd probably commit to doing it pretty much every week, but once in a while we'll grab some of the other spooky crew and bring them in as well. What were some of the other ideas that we had? Anything that was worth mentioning?
I had the idea of for our Patreon subscribers to have access to a like an HD stream that would be a better quality than the regular stream that we put out. Something that's about like equivalent to CD quality
of the podcast,
right?
Not the stream.
Right.
The podcast, you'd get a higher quality podcast. Pseudonym is mentioning Cafe Press. Nope.
We did use them for a while, but one wash with those T-shirts, and
in fairness, that was like 2006.
That's true.
The quality may be better, but in 2006 it was terrible.
Right.
Like we actually told people to stop ordering from stuff in the store.
Right.
Because we tried to shut down the shop and it wouldn't let us. So we're like, just don't buy anything because it was so bad.
My first Spooky South Coast shirt just disintegrated in the wash.
Yep.
It was terrible.
Like it would be one thing if like the shirt stayed okay and like just the logo came off.
Right, but this was like the sleeve was falling off.
Yeah.
It was just ridiculous.
Yeah, like this shirt that I'm wearing now is probably 2010 we got these.
Right, yeah, it still holds up.
So it's 7...
A little faded, but it's. I mean, it's the print's still there,
and it still fits. I mean, I got fatter, but the shirt stayed the same. It didn't shrink at all,
right.
And so it's certainly this is why we go with Darkside Inc. The quality is there. When you buy a shirt from Darkside Inc., it's going to be something that's going to last you a long time. It's not like Cafe Press where you're going to buy one $25 T-shirt. And also, that's the other thing too, is we're able to keep the prices more affordable through Darkside Inc. than we were through Cafe Press. Because Cafe Press, if we sell a shirt for $25, they're getting like 20 of it. Right. So this is way better. So but that's all right. Pseudonym. I appreciate the help, but we have a friend.
Right.
We have somebody that we work with.
And I think Trex. The vendor that we were talking about was Darkside Inc.
Yes,
you can Google it. It's Vinny. What's his last name?
Vin Pacheco.
Vin Pacheco on Facebook.
Anybody that goes to paranormal conventions, they know Vin Pacheco.
You'll know him
because you'll recognize him from the mustache and the sunglasses and the 10,000 rings that he has on. He loves to wear his own product.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like with us, like there's a lot of ways to do things cheaper and easier and faster online. But we also like to try to work with people, and when we have friends that can do things, we want to make sure that we bring in our friends as well. Look at all the paranormal work
supporting small business.
Remember when he went and picked up these T-shirts and Vinny was like, "Oh, ghost hunting? I'd like to get into that."
Right. Yeah.
And now look at him.
Yeah.
He's around. He's doing more stuff than we.
And
are.
I think you hooked him up with the Taps Paramag.
I did. Yes, and then
back in the
day, it just went off. Now Darkside Inc. is the go-to paranormal
and they forgot about
printer. Well, we love you, Vinny. All right, well, why don't we take a break? We'll get our guest, Andrea Kitta, on the phone. We'll come back in just a few minutes with some more. Do you want to take a break, or do you want to just go in the other room and call?
It's up to you.
Why don't you just go in the other room and call, because I don't have any commercials to play. I was going to have to fake my way through a break. You got the number, right? All right. So, and again, if you want to call in at any point during the show, 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. Those are the numbers to be able to call in, but you can also type in your question via the chat room at YouTube. We have our Spooky South Coast YouTube channel up and running, and things seem to be going pretty good. And also, you can tweet it to us at SpookySC or by using the hashtag SpookyLive. I'm going to keep checking that as well throughout the course of the show. You can email us, spookycrew at spookysouthcoast.com. There's no excuse if you want to get involved in the conversation. There's no excuse not to do so. But, of course, the best way is the good old-fashioned way by calling in at 508-996-0500. And we have these numbers up on spookysouthcoast.com. We have them up with the feed as well on the YouTube. So as we get into this discussion, and I think we're going to get pretty in-depth. I think we're going to get pretty intricate in some of the things that we talk about tonight. If you enjoyed last week's show with Jeffrey Kripal, we're going to go even deeper, I think, with a lot of the topics that we discussed last week. And I just happened to see a tweet from Chris Balzano on Twitter where he mentioned that him and Dr. Kitta had a couple of hours long conversation. So I can only imagine that with tonight's show going until midnight, we're only going to hit the tip of the iceberg with all the things that we have to talk about. So why don't I bring on our guest right now? Let me give you a little bit of her bio. Andrea Kitta is a folklorist with a specialty in medicine, belief, and the supernatural. She is also interested in internet folklore, narrative, and contemporary or urban legend. Her current research includes vaccines, pandemic illness, contagion and contamination, stigmatized diseases, disability, health information on the internet, and Slenderman. She is co-editor of the journal Contemporary Legend, a scholarly journal published annually by the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research. And she has numerous other credentials as well that we can talk about during the show. Good evening, Dr. Kitta. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Great to have you on. Thank you for joining us tonight. How are you?
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Well, I have to say, very, very impressive credentials. And as I said to Matt Costa at the beginning of the show, we had Jeffrey Kripal on last week, who's a professor. We have you on today. Like, we're really classing up the joint now with academia.
Right.
Well, first of all, one of the things that I've always loved about our mutual friend Chris Balzano is I call him an analytical folklorist, as somebody who he takes the stories and he breaks them down and figures out what they all mean. And I love somebody such as yourself that can do that can look at a story and realize that it's more than just the story.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much more there. I mean, that's one thing that I think drives every folklorist crazy is when people say that something's like just folklore, and it's like, oh no, there's so much more stuff there. Like, you don't even know, how many layers are at everything, which is what's so exciting about talking to guys like you, because you kind of get it. So,
well, I mean, I suppose though, at the forefront of all of this, folklore has to be a good story. I mean, there has to be a good story for it to get shared and for it to get passed around and for it to have meaning. There has to at least be something that is entertaining, engaging, gripping about the story itself.
Yeah.
Is there
absolutely?
I mean, is there any kind of is there any kind of trick to that? Is there any? Obviously, you can play on people's emotions as a good way to get people to fall into a story.
Yeah, there's no one single trick for sure. I think things just have to be kind of the right place, right time in a lot of ways, and we do see failures of that all the time. So we'll actually hear like something will start kind of becoming a story, and then it just gets dropped off because something about it just doesn't work. And the sort of classic example I always use, like in classes and stuff, is right after 9/11, there was very briefly this story that Jackie Chan was supposed to be in the Twin Towers, and it didn't take off because everybody was like, no, Jackie Chan seems like a really nice guy. Like, what would he have to do with any of this? And, so it was like, it was there for this really brief period of time. But then all these other stories that were around there, like that there were no cabs around the Twin Towers right after, like on 9/11, or that there were, there's all these other sort of stories that kind of seemed more real. So, of course, then they caught on in a lot of different ways. But that was one of the ones that just got dropped because it just didn't feel right. So we see that happen all the time. Something starts off and it sounds like it's a pretty good story, but then things change and it gets dropped.
Well, and also it can, it'll also morph too as well, I'm sure, where, the story, I mean, for example, just talking urban legend stuff, you might hear that a certain celebrity did something lewd and ended up having to go to the hospital, and then but then it turns out it's not that person, but then people start telling about another person. I'm thinking about Richard Gere having gerbils up his ass and things like that.
You're going for Richard Gere, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, I was also thinking I didn't want to get into it because it's a little too graphic for terrestrial radio, but whether or not it was Rod Stewart or Mick Jagger that had to have his stomach pumped, nobody's really sure.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many stories that it ends up being a very transferable story because there's something about it that's believable, and that's something we always look for when we're talking about contemporary or urban legends. We look for something that sounds like it could be true, and that's the stuff that really sticks around, is that thing that has that, like, little bit of, like, well, maybe they could have been that person. So...
And I love that because it doesn't matter if it's true. And I know that sounds terrible because, you would hate to think that people are making things up about these people, but it doesn't have to be true for it to grip people's minds and to get them to talk about it. It just has to have enough of that, like, well, maybe it is. And, you weren't there. You can't say that it wasn't true.
Yeah, exactly. So that believability is important, but it is true, though, that sometimes folklore is true. Like, sometimes people kind of equate the term folklore with things that are automatically false, but not always. Sometimes it is true. And that's what kind of makes it interesting to look into because, when you first start to hear these things, there is that believability element. And even as a folklorist, as someone who studies this stuff, you have that pause where you're like, okay, well, I better look into this because maybe that did actually happen. So...
Well, just doing a little bit of amateur etymology here, I would say that folklore is it's like stories of the people, and that these are stories that were shared amongst people. Was there a counter balance to that? Was there something that folklore was kind of like the amateur version of? Was there a more formalized storytelling that wouldn't maybe have the same themes?
Yeah, I always think of folklore as being sort of the unofficial. It is the counter narrative to the dominant narrative in a lot of different ways. So, that's where I think it is a lot of times when I do my, like, sort of quick definition of folklore, I talk about how it's informal knowledge. It's all the stuff but you don't know how you know it. So, and I think that's a kind of a good way of looking at it because there is that sense of authority and this being sort of a counter narrative to authority at times, but not always. Sometimes it is a story that isn't heard frequently, but it is kind of in some ways counter to that dominant narrative. And that's part of what makes it interesting too, is that it's something different than what we normally hear.
But there doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be something that is purposely, counterculture. It doesn't have to be something that's purposely going against that main narrative. It can just be. It's almost like I look at it like as if you watch a story on the news and two people are sitting there watching this CNN news report, and then somebody turns to the other person in the room and says, "Well, actually, you know what I heard." And it's kind of like that same idea of it's taking that story and kind of putting a different twist or a different emphasis on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're affected by that in so many different ways. Like even in that kind of the scenario you're talking about, someone's going to, at times, tell personal experience narratives, things that actually happened to them. Other times they're going to tell urban legends because it's something that they've heard, and it sounds like something that could be true. So there's so many options in that case that all things that qualify as folklore, but maybe aren't necessarily part of that dominant narrative, or are sort of sometimes counter and sometimes not. Is
there a? I'm just trying to picture in my head, not only the current way of taking it, but also kind of through history as well. I mean, there's always been those who are storytellers, people whose job it was to pass along stories from one generation to the next and from one people to the next. But it seems like folklore is for everybody. It's a story that anybody can tell anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the greatest part about being a folklorist is, we know a lot about the structure and the narrative, and we can do all the analysis, but the people who actually tell us the stories are the experts. We're not the experts. Everyone is the expert. And that's the coolest part about folklore, is that it's something that we all engage in on some level. Like, we've all engaged in it in some point, or we're currently engaging in it right now. So that's what is so cool, because like especially when I teach in class, there's no other class that my students can walk into and already be an expert. But they are an expert in folklore. They know all of this stuff already. I just have to talk to them about a different way of thinking about it and a different way of analyzing it.
Well, and that is kind of, people tell these stories throughout their whole lives, but they don't take a step back and think about the meaning and what it is that they're doing in telling the story. Everybody, we do what we call legend tripping, where we, and I'm sure that you talked about that at length with Chris, where, we're going out there and we're trying to just put ourselves into these stories and then share those experiences with other people. And that by doing that, we become part of the story. And
absolutely.
With folklore, isn't anybody that tells the story kind of just adding a piece to it somewhere along the line?
Absolutely, because every story is different, and the way that people tell it, people constantly change the story. They add a little bit to it, they take a little bit away from it, so that story is just constantly being modified and changed, and it's being made more relevant a lot of times too. So there's versions of stories that we have that are so incredibly old, but we've just modernized them in a lot of different ways. So, I often think of, all the stories that you used to hear about, remember, your grandparents and everything telling you, you sat too close to the TV and it was going to give you cancer?
Yes.
That kind of stuff. We hear now about cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
So it's if you use something to keep your cell phone away from the side of your face because that's going to give you cancer, or don't put it in your pocket because it'll give you cancer. So it's all the same stories. It's just about a different, newer form of technology. So that's what's so cool about this stuff is that it does change and modify over time. And ghost photography is a great example of that. There's all the different ways that people used to think that you could capture ghosts on film. And it was, some people believe that you could be, sort of imprinted on the actual physical film itself. And other people believe that it was the energy that came through the electronics itself. So we've kind of constantly changed our perception of, even with something like that, how it actually works. But it's all kind of tied into this sort of larger, older story of this is how these things work, right?
Absolutely. See, and what we do is we also, as a people, we overcome some of those things too, because, our grandmothers told us not to sit too close to the TV. So what do? We just made bigger, more higher definition TVs. So now we sit far away, but it's still just as big. It's still just right up in our face.
Exactly, right?
I don't know how to fix the cell phone cancer problem, though. I'm a little worried about my butt now.
Yeah, I don't know.
Always in my back pocket.
A couple of years ago, I had a student who brought in, her mother had brought her these stickers, and you could actually put them on your cell phone, and it was supposed to help block some of the radioactivity. I don't know exactly what it was supposed to block. She wasn't entirely sure either. But she bought them for her daughter and all of her daughter's roommates, and they all put them on their phone because it didn't hurt.
Right.
So, and that's one of the other things I love, too, is sometimes we don't even believe in things, but we do them anyway because it doesn't hurt.
Right. Well,
it's not hard to, avoid a ladder. It's not hard to, put a sticker on your cell phone, that kind of stuff. So we'll just do it because, why not? It can't hurt, right?
Well, that's what I love about superstition is that people tell you they don't believe in it, but then they do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And we see that all the time. People pass on beliefs they don't believe in. If somebody breaks a mirror around you, regardless of whether or not you believe that's 7 years bad luck, you're going to say that to them, or you're at least going to think it, right?
Well, I never say that when it comes to breaking mirrors, only because I'm so funny looking. I've probably broken more than my fair share, so I don't worry about that. But I always thought that idea of breaking mirrors came from a time when mirrors were so expensive that that it was kind of just a way to keep people from mishandling them and from taking extra care when holding them.
You know what? And there probably was something to that. Absolutely, because they were very expensive, so you wanted to be careful around them.
Oh, well, now they're kind of pricey because I've been looking for a good mirror that I can use for a portable psychomantium to take some of our haunted events, and I'm looking at them in the store and I'm like, really? It's still that much money for a mirror? I'm just going to end up breaking it.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of shocking, isn't it?
But I guess if it holds 7 years worth of good luck in it, if it doesn't break, then I guess
there you go. So that's
worth
what it's worth.
Yeah, divide it by 7, and you're only paying $10 a year. It's not that bad. We'd pay that. So taking a look at your credentials and your background, it obviously medicine is a big focus for you. How does the world of medicine and folklore cross with each other?
Oh, it does it all the time. And one of the things I'm the most interested in is especially how urban legends affect people's medical decision making. So if they hear a story about something, does that actually affect the decisions they make about medicine? So I think when a lot of people hear folk medicine, they always think of the older stuff, old remedies for things. And that's certainly part of it as well. But I'm really interested in like the really modern stuff. So like how does, and you know, my specialty is the anti-vaccination movement. So how does all of these stories about how like the MMR vaccine causing autism, how does it actually affect people's decision whether or not to get their children the MMR vaccine? So I think that's really, really interesting, fascinating stuff because there's so much research out there, and especially now that you know, terms like fake news have become really popular. I was like, wow, guys, no, that's been around forever, and I saw it all over the place with alternative health websites. And some of them have, you know, good, decent information, but some are terrible and they don't have good information on them. But that still affects how people decide what they're going to do when it comes to, you know, am I going to take this medication? Am I going to take this vaccine? So there's both good and bad about it because, you know, the internet has given us also this space where we can research our own health conditions. We can connect with other people who have similar conditions, which is really great. It also gives us a lot of access, especially for people who maybe were not able to participate in a lot of these conversations before. They can now participate because they have the access via the internet. So it's such an interesting place to look at how health and belief really affect people's everyday lives. So it's just fascinating.
I mean, it really is. Like, it's people are getting to the point where they're starting to believe in the power of belief when it comes to their own health more than, you know, it's almost like it's cyclical with the way that we would have felt with spiritualism, you know, hundreds of years ago. And now it's kind of coming back full circle where, yeah, medicine is great and medicine helps, but we also want to try to find ways to kind of heal ourselves and to believe that we, like just the other night, you know, I've been going through a little bit of a health issue and I'm laying on my bed and I'm visualizing, you know, trying to solve this problem while I'm laying there in bed. And I think people are starting to look into that more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, especially with things like visualization, there's actually some pretty good evidence that it can help. But that's not to say, because, you know, then the sort of other side of that is there's a sort of implication that if you can't heal yourself, you're not trying hard enough, you know, and that's a really negative thing to kind of say that, like, you know, if you just thought more positively or if you just tried harder, you could heal yourself. Well, obviously that's not always true. So, you know, there's so many different factors involved. So it's so interesting to see how belief has started to affect these things. So I think, you know, things like visualization, which have, you know, pretty good evidence, are pretty great, but they don't work for everybody. And then that becomes problematic too.
And you know, I love that one of the areas that you research into is health information on the internet because, you know, just as you know, everybody on Facebook is a lawyer, everybody on Facebook thinks they're a doctor too. You know, everybody kind of has their well, this is what I do and this works for me, and you know, and then somebody says it didn't work for me, well, then you must be doing it wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there is that sort of idea, which is so funny because we know when we look at sort of, you know, official medicine, that not everything works for everybody, but we're not as sympathetic when it comes to alternative medicine sometimes. They're like, well, if you just tried harder, if you just did more, it would work for you. It's like, well, no, of course, not everything works for everybody.
Right. I can't tell you how many times, like, I've had something that, you know, might be wrong, something that might just be a little bit off, and I'll get 100 people that tell me, go to GNC and buy this, but everybody's telling me something different. I'm like, if I go into GNC and buy one of those things, it's more money than I'm wanting to spend, let alone buying 100 different things.
Well, and that's a big part of it, too. We can't forget that sometimes these alternative health websites are linked to places where you can buy things. So they're not so much good information or even information that's trying to be helpful. They're sometimes just information that's trying to sell stuff to people.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, too, is, you know, we look at, especially in this genre and in the alternative talk, we can say, you know, paranormal topics, strange and unusual stuff, we get a lot of these, you know, the stuff that the carnivora, the things like that, things that you're supposed to take that are going to make you feel better, things that you're going to take that are going to make you survive the coming apocalypse, you know, all these different things that are really just more hype than they are anything else.
Well, and that's just it, because unfortunately, especially with things when we're talking about the paranormal and the supernatural, just one charlatan or one bad person can really turn everybody against it. So, you know, just like you have good and bad physicians, you have good and bad psychics, you have good and bad everything, right? So some people are out for the money, but there are other people that are genuinely trying to help people.
Well, I guess, though, if if you can believe in something and it works for you, then it's worth that, even if it's just a placebo effect. But if it can be enough for you to buy into it, then it works. And I say that all the time about psychics. I argue, my usual co-host, Stephanie Burke, is a psychic medium. She's out tonight at an event. But we argue all the time about the value of people going to a bad psychic. You know, she sees it as if somebody else is doing the same job that she can do, that she is a legitimate psychic, but somebody's going to see somebody else who is just kind of cold reading them and telling them what they want to hear. I say, but there's still some value in that, because if it makes the person feel better in the end, that's really all that matters.
Well, that's just it. And I think we tend to undersell the placebo effect in a lot of different ways, and including with things like psychics. I mean, if the end result is, does the person feel better? Well, then, you know, it's been a successful treatment to some extent, right? So if, you know, somebody tries an alternative healthcare as a treatment and it works for them, well, then great. You know, maybe they're in less pain, or maybe they're managing their symptoms better, or maybe, you know, it helps them self-heal, or whatever it's going to be. So I don't think we should discount placebo, because it does have some value. Now, I understand as you know, for someone who like is a psychic, they probably get pretty ticked off about the ones that you know don't aren't as ethical, of course. But yeah, in some cases that doesn't mean that they're necessarily, you know, all bad. Maybe, you know, we can certainly question their ethics, but if maybe they do help people, you know. And I mean, there are some cases too where somebody just needs to hear something. You know, I talk to people that do this kind of stuff all the time, and you know, sometimes they're like, yeah, I'm just here to listen, and almost like a sort of amateur, you know, psychologist, just let them talk, and that's all they need. In some cases that's what they need, and sometimes, you know, sadly enough, psychics are sometimes cheaper than psychologists, so they get what they need from those people, and there's value in that too.
And that's one of the things that we've talked about too, is that Stephanie and I, where, you know, some people are doing this, just to go back to the psychics, you know, they're going into this and thinking that they are legitimately psychics, even though they're not really doing it right, so to speak. They have the feeling, because it's kind of, you know, they've bought into the idea as well. So, and I think that that's part of why this doesn't always work for everybody when it comes to some of these alternative medicines ideas, just because it worked for you. And as you said, it's not going to work for everybody. But when it does work for you, you become so hardened in that belief that it was the right thing that you can't understand why it isn't the right thing for somebody else.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. You know, and it's all about what works for people. And I don't think that, you know, if it does, if in the end it reduces suffering, then great. You know, like, great, we've been successful.
Now, is there, I mean, there is some downside to preying on people's, you know, when people aren't at their best, when people are in searching for answers, there is some downside to preying on that and to trying to profit off it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I don't have a whole lot of time for that. I really don't think that, especially when people are suffering, that anybody should prey on that. You know, I think there are times, you know, I've been around even other psychics and everything who have said things like, you know, I just can't read this person. And a lot of times they're like, here's your money back. Like, here, you know, like, for some reason I can't read you. I don't know why, it's just not working. And I think that's an honest answer, but sometimes you come across people who will say something no matter what. And that's, you know, that's where we get really problematic, especially as the price starts to go up and up sometimes in some of these cases. And, you know, and that's generally being a bad person, and I'm not going to support that. But unfortunately you know, it can really harm the entire area of what they're doing, or the benefit that they can have because of one or two bad people.
Absolutely. And we see that a lot in the paranormal realm, as you mentioned. It only takes one person screwing it up to make people question everybody. And it only takes, you know, like for example, you know, we do paranormal events as a way to get out there and raise money for historical places. And it just takes one person screwing over somebody for everybody to get looked at with the stink eye.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But hopefully people won't mind then, now that I will segue into a promotion for our next event, which is no. But we do have one, actually. No, all kidding aside. If anybody wants to go to SpookySouthCoast.com, Lizzie's March to Murder, it's up there for sale. There's a few tickets remaining. We are going to take a break coming up in just a minute for our network news. But when we come back on the other side, I want to get more into the idea of some of this folklore about the supernatural, especially some of these things that have kind of stood the test of time, which a lot of these do. And of course, I definitely want to get into Slenderman, because I know that is something that is, it's the perfect example of how a made-up story can become something tangible.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll get into all that and more coming up in just a few moments. Again, if anybody wants to call in during the show, you can do so by calling in at 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. You can tweet us your questions at SpookySC or using the hashtag SpookyLive. Email them, SpookyCrew@SpookySouthCoast.com. You can also send us, what was the other way that you can get? Oh, in the chat room at SpookyTV@SpookySouthCoast.com, or on YouTube, or however you are watching the show live. There's usually a chat room option there. Just type in your question. I'm trying to keep up with stuff there as much as I can, but of course the conversation always just goes off on tangents, which is, it's awesome. That's why we have the chat room. We want that to happen. We want people to engage in conversations, but we will certainly try to keep our eyes out for some questions there as well. So we are going to take a break for the news. When we come back, more with our guest, Dr. Andrea Kitta. Your questions as well coming up in the next hour. Stay tuned for more Spooky South Coast. Welcome back. Hour number 2 of Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with the silent assassin Matt Costa, science advisor Matt Moniz, and Stephanie Burke, both out of the Spooky Studio tonight. I don't know exactly what Moniz is up to, but Stephanie is at her, what's the name of the event, do you remember? I don't remember. It's Spooky Thanksgiving or something like that. Yeah, they're trying to leech off our name.
Stealing the name.
So, but it's herself and Dustin Parry, and Cody's there, and Ashley, and everybody, and we're here doing the show because
I hope they bring us a Thanksgiving sandwich.
That's all that I care about,
because they do have a turkey dinner there.
I wanted to be here to do the show because we have a great guest, and we'll get right back into it with Dr. Andrea Kitta in just a moment. But I do want a turkey sandwich, so there's that too.
Right, there's nothing better than a Thanksgiving sandwich.
Right? Do you? Just real quickly, we have to talk about food at some point during the show,
right.
So we might as well do it now. Real quickly, what goes on your perfect Thanksgiving sandwich?
Do you want me to start with the base?
Yes.
Base is mashed potatoes.
Okay. On top of the bread.
Right.
Okay.
Then
what kind of bread, by the way?
Doesn't matter. White bread.
All right.
Whatever bread's laying around. Usually potatoes, peas, turkey, gravy, cranberry sauce on the other side. Stick it together.
So you go full out with the peas and everything? So
if there's butternut squash, then that goes in the middle too.
The butternut squash is the key.
It's got to go in the middle though.
So I go white bread. I go mayonnaise. You got to have the mayonnaise on it.
Okay.
All right. Then I hit it with some stuffing.
Then I forgot the stuffing. Yeah, the stuffing in there somewhere. Yeah.
I hit it with the stuffing. Then I hit it with the squash.
Mm-hmm.
Then I hit it because I like the squash to go between the turkey and the stuffing. Then the turkey. Then the cranberry sauce.
Mm-hmm.
And then more mayonnaise on the other piece of bread. That's it. That's all that I need.
Yeah.
And
it's a good sandwich.
If there's some more pearl onions, I like a few of those on the side.
Yeah. And it somehow tastes better at like 12:30 at night. Like
right.
Yeah, after Thanksgiving is done.
I mean, I haven't made Thanksgiving at my house ever. It's always been we've gone to somebody else's house, but we always make sure we take plenty of leftovers.
Right.
For the inevitable desire. Let's bring our guest, Dr. Andrea Kitta, back and ask her, Dr. Kitta, what's your perfect Thanksgiving sandwich if you were going to construct one?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not much of a sandwich person. I just go for.
Well, this has been a great interview. Thanks for talking with us, but we only talk to sandwich people on this show.
That's it. I'm out now, right?
But but a sandwich is just like just like a good folklore story. Everybody's got their own take on it. Everybody's got their own way
That's
of
right.
as long as the meat in the middle is the same, how you get to that meat is all up to you.
That's it. That's a very good analogy.
If it's one thing I can do, I can make up food analogies all day long. So we've been talking a bit in the first hour. We talked quite a bit about medicine and about your work in that regard. But also, a big part of what you deal in, as we mentioned before, is folklore, superstition, and the supernatural. And it's, I hate to ask you how long you've been doing this for, but was there a time in your career when the supernatural wasn't something that you felt comfortable or that was accepted being talked about in a classroom environment?
That's a really good question. Actually, when I first got started, I was always interested in the supernatural, but I was sort of told, like, well, you get your job, get tenure, then you can do supernatural.
Right.
And that was something I kind of, I followed a bit. I got asked at one point at my university, we want to do a new fun course. We wanted to have a really cool title. Do you have any ideas? And I was like, oh yeah, I want to teach a class called The Supernatural. And, of course that has, once we developed it, has become the most popular course there. So, but yeah, there's that tension there too. And I've actually had people discredit my work with medicine because I also do the supernatural, which I think is kind of hilarious.
Yeah, we were talking about that at the beginning of the show about the person that Donald Trump nominated.
Yeah.
I mean, what's I don't understand why that should matter, why that should take away. I actually got into an argument. I used to do a Saturday morning general talk show here on the station, and I got into it one day with a call. Actually, my last show, I got into it with a caller who said, that I wasn't entitled to have my opinions on politics or the economy or anything like that because I'm a ghost hunter.
Yeah, and I think that is very problematic, and it's something we actually talk about a lot in folklore. We talk about the traditions of belief and disbelief, which is this idea from David Hufford, this whole sort of concept that just as there's traditional things to believe in, there's traditional things to disbelieve in, right? Mm-hmm. So we're totally fine in North American culture, generally speaking, that we're fine with somebody to, like, if you have a belief in a deity, that's not too bad, right? We're pretty cool with that. And it's like, then there's like these gray areas where, like, do you believe in, like, supernatural creatures like angels? Like, angels more okay maybe than ghosts for some people. But then, like, if we cross into, like, Jesus is having breakfast with me, now we're into, like, a whole different area, right? So it's like, it's fine to believe in Jesus, but not if he's having breakfast with you. So, there's all these lines that we draw, and they're really arbitrary. If we're going to really think about what is a rational belief, we don't really decide things based on that. We decide more on the fact that they're something that we've always believed in, and we haven't always believed in them. So it is the supernatural is an arbitrary sort of line that we've decided is something that we're not supposed to believe in.
And I think part of the problem, and I'm sure that you have delved into this deeper than I have, but one of the things that I've realized is that when you look at American history, we're only a couple of 100 years old. We've got a variety of different cultures. So if you go to other countries where they have a longer history with their people, and B, a more of a concentration of one certain kind of people and belief set, it's these traditions can take hold there a little bit easier. Here in America, it's almost like it's a culture shock of all of these amalgamations of different belief systems and different supernatural beliefs and everything kind of all thrown together, and we expect it all to coexist.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the, to go back to something else David Hufford said, was he had this really succinct way of talking about belief, and I thought it's just so beautiful and perfect. But he said, what I know, but what you only believe. I thought, that's like perfect. That's exactly how we approach other people's beliefs, right? Well, the things that we believe we're totally sure about. But when we talk about other people's beliefs, that we think of them as being, sort of arbitrary or not as deeply felt as our own belief. And that's, of course, simply not true. Everybody, the way we process belief and the way we think about belief, it's really complicated. And it's not just something you just wake up one day and decide to believe in something. Like, it's a long process. People have experiences. They have, they hear stories. They have all this sort of amalgamation of information, and then they make a decision about whether or not to believe that. And that changes throughout life. But we tend to treat it as this this thing that is irrational and is illogical, when in actuality there's a lot of reason and logic applied to belief. It's, but we also kind of tend to think of the words reason and logic as being also synonymous with correct. No, it's not always correct, but there is reason and logic behind it.
Well, I also think we don't do ourselves any favors with the way that we introduce these stories to people, because, we're going to tell a lot of stories of folklore and fairy tales and things of that nature to young kids. And then at the same time, we're also telling them that none of this stuff is real. So you're giving them these stories that they don't have the opportunity to analyze, because you're telling them right from the beginning, it's just a good story and that's it.
Yeah, and that's so problematic when we think about even things like trust. We're not really building up a really good system of trust with children if we tell them all these stories and then tell them later that we were lying to them.
Right.
So, that's a really problematic sort of system to set up.
I mean,
there's so many things that we're taught as children and then taught later on that they're not true.
It's one of the first things that your parents do is start lying to you. They lie to you about the Tooth Fairy, the Easter Bunny, and Santa Claus. So automatically, I'll never forget, this story of my son when, he found out that there was no Santa Claus. He was very upset because he said, all those years I thought it was somebody else that was giving me those gifts when actually I should have been thanking my parents. And it's like, and some people, that's the way that they take it. It's, you're lying to them, and now they're like, well, can I trust you about any of this stuff that you've told me now over the years?
Yeah, exactly.
Although it's I hate to crap on the magic, but it still astounds me that any kid buys into that story anymore, really, when you look at it, because you're like, it doesn't really make any sense at all.
No, but, but they believe it because they trust the parents, right?
Right. And we're just abusing that trust as parents.
Yeah, so we're really kind of setting up a really bad system when we think about it that way.
That's all right, though, because they end up becoming smarter than us anyway, and they get the last word in the end. But a lot of these, these stories that we tell in this country have come from Europe. We brought a lot of our folklore over from there, but we've also created some of our own uniquely American folklore as well. What would you say is probably if you're going to take a look at all the different all the archetypes of stories, is there one thematic element that has kind of traveled across all cultures? I mean, I know the story of the hero is something that has transcended pretty much through every generation, especially the tragic hero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't like to think too much about. So I have one problem with archetype. I'll just say that right off the bat, and I think some folklorists will agree with me and some won't. My personal opinion is that context really matters. So when we think about these stories that sort of transcend time, we also have to think about the context of those stories, right? So a lot of people always point to something like Cinderella. So almost every culture has a story about Cinderella, right? Or they at least have a story about a girl who is sort of put to a lower position in her family and forced to work, and then later on her actual position is sort of realized, and good things happen to her. And I mean, yes, that's true. That's a pretty common type of story. But the context of it is so different, right, in every different culture. So there's all these different versions of that story, and all those little details actually really matter a lot. So it could be anything from, was it her mother or her stepmother? Was it her, her father dies or he doesn't die? What kind of shoe is it? There's so many other little things other even than that, other than those sort of motifs in it, that really matter. What is the cultural situation that she grew up in? What is, where is the, the lines of lineage and all that kind of stuff. There's so many complicated things there. But I do think there are things that we understand as human beings. There are things, too, that are kind of unique about us, but there's also things that we have in common, right? We understand general feelings like betrayal, love, that kind of stuff. And then those stories, we kind of refer to it in folklore as polygenesis. More than one person can kind of come up with some of these stories. So it makes sense. It's not like there's ever one single story that all these things kind of come from.
Right.
But yeah, there's so many things when we think about so many stories that have some similarities across the way. And then just things that stick around for a really long time. I always think of one of the oldest urban legends that we know about is the vanishing hitchhiker legend, which is a pretty common story about, usually the modern versions involve someone picking up a hitchhiker and then finding out kind of through the night, either she disappears from the back seat of the car, she leaves the sweater behind, something like that happens, and the person finds out that she died like 10 years ago that very night. And we actually know of versions of that go all the way back to people riding on horseback, people being in carriages. And there's even a story, too, that's even older that goes to two people walking next to each other. The horseback one's actually one of the best ones because this guy actually picks up this woman alongside of the road, puts her in front of him on the horse. She gets heavier as the night goes on, and when he comes to the town in the morning, he realizes that there's actually a corpse in front of him.
Wow! I like that one.
Story.
Oh, that's
why I have to tell it.
That's way better than the Dickie Lee song, where it's just, I found a sweater on her grave, And
yeah, you're right. It's so much better than a sweater on a grave.
AKA the Growing Pains episode for anybody, the Halloween Growing Pains episode for anybody that remembers that. But we have our own hitchhiker story here, where we are on the south coast of Massachusetts. We have our red-headed hitchhiker to Route 44, and that same story is told up and down every road. It's not anything that. Although what's interesting is, I look at it the same way you do, where it's a story, and there's really no way to kind of trace it back to any kernel of truth, except for the fact that we do a stage show called An Evening of Ghost Stories and New England Legends, where myself and some of my friends, we tell these ghost stories in front of these giant photos displayed on a big screen behind us, and it's like a ghost tour on stage. And so I get up there the first time, and I tell the story of the red-headed hitchhiker of Route 44, and a guy comes up to me after the show and starts talking to me and says, you mentioned in that there's no record of anything ever happening on that part of the road or anything, but my brother's a cop, and he starts telling me the whole story of who this red-headed hitchhiker probably is and where that ghost story came about, which kind of blew my mind, because I'm like, but no, this is just a story that's told everywhere. How can there be this one true person that this one traces back to? But it just goes to show that maybe the real life tragic event happens and the urban legend just builds up around it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, that's entirely possible with a lot of these, because some of them are stories where something like that could happen. I mean, that's that believable element of them. There's, they sound like something that could absolutely happen.
Or maybe, something just happens, the story exists, and something else happens that kind of just fits into it. Because one of the things that I was talking about with somebody recently, when it comes to folklore and stories that are passed down, is the fact that, well, if these stories are just stories, their staying power in them is that we don't change the way that we tell them. That people are still telling, like you mentioned, Cinderella or Snow White or any of these Grimm's fairy tales. They're still telling them the same way, hundreds of years later, but they're not. We may still tell the original version, but we're also forever, modernizing them, adapting them, coming up with newer, more modern versions of these stories, ethnic versions of these stories. We always morph these stories into something else.
Yeah, we change them all the time. And we adapt them, you're right, to different situations, to different, we may, there's a new Cinderella movie every couple of years, right? Or we see that motif, especially in children's shows and a lot of other places, because, in part, a lot of these stories get used and reused, not only because they speak to us on a lot of different levels, but we also have to remember they're also free.
Right, that's the other thing. They're in the public domain, so there's no rights involved with it.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about the rights to them. So, but there is something, and I think that's, part of good storytelling is that you do have to really kind of attach to something the audience already knows and then build on that. And that's what these stories do. These are stories that sound familiar to us. We've heard something like them. So when we hear them again, they sound vaguely familiar, but not so familiar that we're bored with them, So before we get into
Slenderman, I want to talk about some of the other urban legends that have kind of gripped people in recent years. One of them being, and this one comes up a lot, and we can say whether or not it's true paranormal research or just folklore storytelling or urban legend or what have you, but the black-eyed kids have become a big story that a lot of people have shared, and I assume that you've had a lot of people share with you accounts of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard these stories. I would say that and shadow people are the two probably most common things I hear, at least from my students. Those those have been cycled through a few times now. So, I mean, we refer to them as legend cycles sometimes, where, certain stories actually kind of come back into popularity after a certain period of time. And we know that these things will kind of drop out for a while and they'll come back up. So, yeah, we've been hearing these on and off. And I think, especially in the case of the black-eyed children, they're so uncanny. They're so creepy because, children, generally speaking, can be creepy.
Yes, I agree.
For lack of better terms. But
I hate to say that, but I agree.
They say odd things. They perceive things we don't, right? So they can be kind of creepy. So this idea, especially with the eyes, because that is something that we, the humanness of the eye of eyes, especially in the case, obviously, of humans, that really speaks to us. So to have the eyes be different is part of what makes it so uncomfortable and so uncanny.
Well, you mentioned legend cycles. What are some of the things that we've seen come in a cyclical nature?
There's so many of them. We've actually, the creepy clown has been a legend cycle more recently. So we've seen it cycle through in a couple of different places. There was a legend cycle, actually, I think it was in 2014 in France, of creepy clowns. Then we had the 2016 sort of legend cycle of creepy clowns, and then, of course, with it this year. But we didn't have the same one that kind of happened, the previous year. But that's one that's kind of cycled through. We see, I see it all the time with vaccines, specifically, especially the flu vaccines. We get a legend cycle every flu season about the vaccine and whether or not it's effective and, if it gives you the flu and stuff like that. So we'll see ones like that are a little bit more annual, but then there'll be other ones that, if there's a big disaster, there'll be a legend cycle that kind of comes up where you'll hear these stories about Bibles that didn't burn or, something falls into the shape of a cross or someone is miraculously saved by a Bible or a flask or some other sort of object. So those kind of stories kind of cycle back in too, and we have like major tragedies too.
So it's very interesting that you can see the patterns to these things, that a lot of what just seems as general weirdness to a lot of us is actually cyclical in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anything that we're kind of in the midst of now that that's caught your attention?
Right now, I think we're so caught up into what is actually happening in the world. We haven't had as much time for legends, but we certainly do still see them all the time. There's actually, if anybody is interested, there's a great Facebook group with the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research, and people probably post 20 times a day on that about different legends that they're seeing reemerge. Legends that are mentioned in the news or in other places. So that's a great place to kind of look for them and see like what people are kind of talking about. And we'll see stuff come up just with Halloween coming around. We saw the legend cycle of people poisoning children's Halloween candy or giving children drugs.
Well,
looking like candy in some sort of way. So that was like a pretty good legend cycle that comes up usually around Halloween every year.
That I can tell you who made up that legend. That was my grandfather making that up so he could take all of my candy back when I was a kid.
That's what I always thought as a kid too.
It's like it was the ones. I could always tell which ones were going to have the poison in them because they were always the ones that he was buying the rest of the year, and would always have in the dish next to his chair. So I knew like if I had a Three Musketeers, it was probably poison. And but for some reason the poison doesn't work on adults. It just works on kids. Something to do with our genetic makeup, I guess. Well, we have a call on the line here, so let's take that call. Good evening. You're on Spooky South Coast with Dr. Kitta. How are you?
Well, hey Tim, this is Cameron Pasha from California calling in.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm well. I'm really enjoying tonight's podcast, and Professor, I really want to thank you for speaking. I know how in the academic world a lot of the supernatural stuff you're talking about is seen as very strange. So thank you for sharing this really wonderful perspective. So the question I have is, I actually would love to hear about your thoughts on the Bigfoot phenomenon, because my opinion is that is really the most basic North American folklore story, because it goes back to Native Americans. I work in the Hollywood industry, and people often think it's crazy that I believe in things like Bigfoot. But I'm like, do you doubt hundreds of Native tribes and their consistent stories that go back centuries and that are still alive today? So I'd love to get your perspective on the phenomenon as folklore and what it means.
All right. Were you able to hear the question, Dr. Kitta?
Oh, yeah, actually, I only caught parts of that.
Okay,
Sorry,
sometimes,
was kinda cutting out a little bit.
Sometimes the phones don't really match up well. But the question was about Bigfoot as American folklore, particularly with the Native American tribes.
Absolutely. And I will fully admit that is not my specialty, so I don't know a ton about Bigfoot. There are a lot of other people that know much, much more than I do. But that has been one that's been going around for a really long period of time. There's something, whenever I hear a story that is sticks around like that, there's always something to it, right? And it might be that it is interesting, or it really speaks to our relationship with the environment, or it really speaks to something else, or that it is simply, it's something that people have seen and have passed it on. We can't kind of, discount that people have had experiences. So it's one of those things that with something as enduring as that, there's got to be something there, right? There has to be something that people are really attaching to. So I don't discount any of that kind of stuff. I think it can be, really important to know a little bit more about. And I apologize, it's not my area of expertise. I know so many more people that are more experts in this than myself. But, I think there's something there. And it's such a, in some ways it is a uniquely American story. In other ways it's not, because we have stories about Yetis and other ones from across the globe. But there is something about that notion of, especially things that look human-ish but aren't exactly human. There's something there that we really attach to in some sort of way. There's, kind of go back to that word uncanny. There's something really uncanny about them. And I think that's part of the reason why we tell these stories so often, is because it's just something that we really attach to.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the call, Cameron.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
We'll see you soon. And that is one of the things, you mentioned the fact that humanistic qualities are something that we tend to look for in a lot of these stories. One of those stories is the idea of the Jersey Devil. Has there been a lot of stories about that recently? Because I can't get into things that I'm not given permission to talk about on the air, but there's somebody who's having an experience where something might be similar to that. And is that something that pops up now and again, the idea of this Jersey Devil type phenomenon?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's a really common, especially for the Pine Barrens in New Jersey. You hear more, of course, people from that area talking about it. But yeah, that one kind of cycles through too, and sort of the beliefs about it. But it's one of the ones that if you ask someone, tell me a story, about a supernatural creature, tell me a story about a place, they're going to come up with the Jersey Devil, because that is one that is really permeated through our culture in a lot of different ways. And I think it is that idea that it is, in part, I guess it's partially kind of, it's not really human, but it kind of is human. And the whole, notion of the woman who's giving birth and saying, for a 13th child, and that the devil may take it, or, it's the devil's child, along those lines. And I think that's another thing that we really, a lot of our stories do involve things like the nature of good and evil. And that's certainly one that kind of ties into that.
So my other co-host, Matt Moniz, is not here either. He is a ufologist. He's somebody who has worked very closely with abductee cases, says he's been abducted himself. One thing that I want to ask you, because I love to ask this question, and it really pisses Moniz off, so he's not here to argue it, is the idea of aliens, UFOs. Are these just modern versions of the boogeyman? Or does our boogeyman not just change with time and with technology, that we have to find something else to be afraid of?
That's a really interesting question, because I think yes and no.
Okay.
So I think we've had this idea of, especially aliens, of people coming from other planets for a really, really long period of time. And I don't think anything has changed about that. But I think sometimes other stories get melded into that and kind of blended in. Because one of the things I'm kind of interested in, just because it's something I talk about a lot and something I teach a lot, is sleep paralysis. And the idea of, especially the old hag, especially in the Newfoundland tradition, where there is literally something sitting on your chest. And the fact that a lot of people have the perception that they see something when this incident happens, which has some biomedical explanation, but is not entirely explained by biomedicine. But a lot of times, too, I hear that in combination with abduction narratives, right? Or I hear it in combination with a UFO story. So I think those two things were kind of separate traditions for a while, but now they're kind of starting to blend together into one, where it's not just a witch that's sitting on your chest, or it's a demon, or it's a black dog or cat, or anything like, or some sort of supernatural entity, but that it is an alien that's doing it. So I think there is some blending of that tradition. And, and some people might argue with me and say, well, maybe it was always aliens, and, it was the older tradition to believe that it was any of those other things.
Yeah, maybe that's what the aliens were projecting, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's quite possible that if there is some mind control element to this, maybe they're the ones that are just kind of making it whatever society believes in at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's that argument as well. So, it is, it's interesting to think about, because we do change slightly about what we think is scary over time. But we still kind of come back to the same larger notions of kids are always creepy. Things that look like us but aren't us are always creepy. And that's and a lot of times that's how aliens are portrayed, right? You have the Greys that are sort of humanoid in some sort of way, but they look like us but they don't.
And one of the things that looks like us but isn't, of course, is Slenderman, which is something that I have never seen something take off like this, in a way where we know from the outset that it's not real, but yet we've made it real.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that was surprising for a lot of us. Even for folklorists who are used to seeing things kind of take off, we're like, wow, why is this so popular? Why this thing in particular? And I think that was really fascinating for us to watch, because we know it started on the Something Awful forum in 2009. We know that it has this sort of trajectory. We know all of the video games. We know the YouTube channels. We know, all the stuff that's kind of come through. But that hasn't stopped people's belief, especially when it came to doing the Photoshop, which is really interesting, too, to see how many different ways people manipulated photos to make it look like Slenderman was in them. And that was always so cool, because it was sort of a weird, where's Waldo kind of thing sometimes, or
right.
Someone would post a picture online and you'd be like, I can't find Slenderman. Where is he? But yeah, it was so amazing to see how that took off. And it may have died out, generally speaking, or for a lot of people, they didn't even know it existed until, of course, the stabbings that happened. And that kind of, brought a resurgence of at least more people sort of knowing about it. So I felt like there was a sort of a group of people who knew about it, and then it got, sort of more widespread because of the stabbings. But yeah, that was so interesting to see how people really connected with it, and that they would see these Photoshops, especially some of the Photoshops of the woodcuts, that made it look a lot older than what it really was. So it kind of became this thing of, well, are we just talking about it now? Is it, something that we forgot about, but we've actually used to know in the past, and now it's sort of resurged. And that was really kind of fascinating to see people talk about that. And even the people who accepted the fact that it was created in 2009, there was also sort of that belief that it became what was, frequently called a tulpa or an egregor or a thought form, that it was something that we, by talking about it, by acknowledging it, brought into existence, which is also a really interesting concept.
And I think that's a big part of this, is the fact that we are kind of willing it into existence. For example, here in the south coast of Massachusetts, we have the Native American Pukwudgies, which were something that the natives believed in hundreds of years ago. And then there's all these years where you could almost say, okay, maybe there wasn't a lot of sightings of them or a lot of reported sightings of them. But now that the term has come back into fashion, now all of a sudden we're seeing more sightings of these, almost because we're willing them into existence by talking about them. And I think that does happen with these things.
Yeah, it's really this interesting idea. Folklore sometimes talk about the cultural source hypothesis and the experiential source hypothesis. And for a long time, a lot of people really believed that we had supernatural experiences because we had stories. So we'd hear the story, and then, we'd get scared in the middle of the night. We'd think we saw something, but it was because of the story. But actually, people have experiences, right? And sometimes they don't know the stories. This is really common with sleep paralysis. So people will have, sleep paralysis episodes where they wake up in the middle of the night, they're unable to move. Sometimes they see something, and they won't tell anybody about it for years. But But then they later on find out that there's all these stories about this. And for a lot of people, that actually makes them feel a lot better because they realize it's not just them, they're not going crazy. But that it's actually the experience that starts before the story. So it does kind of get into that question of, you know, in some ways, which came first? And of course, in some cases, it's both. Sometimes, you know, you hear about this stuff and then you have the experience. But other times, the experience comes first without even knowing anything about it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an interesting way to think about it, instead of just sort of blaming stories on it, thinking of it as, well, people had the experience and that's where the stories came from.
I did have somebody mention to me once before when the stabbings took place and Slenderman was kind of in the news for all of that. And I work in news, so people are constantly, when news stories come up about weird stuff, they're always asking me what I think about it. And so somebody at the newspaper where I worked asked me, you know, is this the first time that you can remember where somebody's, you know, superstition or belief in the supernatural led them to do something like this? And I was like, well, no, there's a little something that happened in Salem in 1692 that was probably a little bit more egregious than this, but it has been something that people have taken these beliefs to an extreme and actually done harm to other people over them.
Absolutely. And I mean, we even saw in the late 70s and the 80s the satanic panics, you know, where we were blaming kids, we were blaming people, we were actually pinning murders on people for no other reason than, you know, they were the goth kids in town, right? So, you know, and it's a sort of lower level, you know, for lack of better terms, witch hunt. But yeah, I mean, we fall into this. We like to think of these things too, I think sometimes as, oh, that's, you know, part of this old thinking process. We don't think like that anymore. It's like, no, we still do. And I mean, we've certainly done it in even more recent years. I mean, a lot of our fear of Muslims, of people, you know, we get all these stories, you know, I was kind of talking earlier about 9/11 stories, and it's the same thing with the whole story about seeing people celebrate after 9/11 that were Muslim or were from an area that people perceived as being part of 9/11. And, you know, we still see that terror and that fear where people get visually upset when they see someone that they perceive as being from that culture. So it's a different kind of witch hunt. Now, are we burning, you know, people? Well, of course, they didn't really burn that many people in Salem, but, you know, we're hanging people for it? Not yet. You know?
Right.
So,
and even then,
we don't.
Even then, the hangings
that's happened in the past. It's something currently happening too, right? So, you know, I think we can be kind of judgy about this stuff and think, oh, you know, it happened then, it doesn't happen anymore. Well, no, it still happens all the time. You know, these girls having this experience, yeah, you know, it got into the news, it became very popular, but it's not like this is the first time something like this has happened.
Especially where we're willing to mold what's happening into fitting our narrative of it. So like you mentioned the satanic panic, and I remember being a young person and seeing you know, MTV news reports of it was a Judas Priest album that they were saying push somebody into either killing somebody else or killing themselves or what have you. And because when they played the record backward, you could hear the phrase, "Hey mom, my chair is broken." So obviously that meant some sort of satanic code to people that they're, I'm like, but what does that mean? "Hey mom, my chair is broken." Just because that's what you think that you're hearing when you play it backwards doesn't mean that it drove anybody to do anything, you know, anything egregious like that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And well, it was just the same as, I mean, people used to say the Paul is dead thing if you played the Beatles albums backwards, right? So, I mean, all of this stuff is, you know, it just keeps kind of cycling through. But, yeah, sometimes people read something more into it. I actually remember at one point, too, where they were banning peace signs because they said they were actually just stylized inverted crosses. You know, this is like part of the satanic panic. So, you know, I think people tend to overreact. And actually the whole Halloween candy thing we were just talking about, too, was all a part of that. This notion that, you know, Satanists were going to poison your children's Halloween candy. And we can't celebrate Halloween anymore because it's a Satanist holiday, you know. The best meme that I saw this Halloween was somebody had posted up, you know, make sure you check all your kids' candy. You never know what you're going to find. And it was like a Milky Way broken open with like a 9mm handgun in the middle of it. It actually made me laugh out loud. I was like, all right, that's pretty good. That was good. All right, we do have a call on the line. Again, if anybody wants to call in with any questions for our guest, Dr. Kitta, 508-996-0500, 877-996-1420. Good evening. You're next on Spooky South Coast. How are you?
How you doing?
Good. Do you have a question for Dr. Kitta?
No, well, you mentioned pug wedgies.
Yes.
Yeah, well, a pug wedgie is a deformed bush hog. Now, I've seen them at the golf course, and I see they come from the second hole in, and they're a bush hog that has a deformed face.
So you've seen them on the golf course.
Oh yeah, at the whale. Yep, pug wedgies.
So
they're a bush hog. I think they probably come out of the Freetown State Forest or through a sonnet down to that valley there. What do they call that? The Pascamantic Valley, where there's some water behind the second hole at the whale.
So,
Whale City.
But what about all the supernatural stories that are attached to these things?
Well, I've seen it jump a chain link fence.
That's
and
pretty.
Disappear, take right off and disappear. Jump the chain link fence.
I mean, the people are still
more than a bush hog that has a deformed face.
Oh, see, I've heard them described as everything from little tiny versions of Native Americans to, something that looks like out of the movie Critters. That there's all these different.
Pug wedgies are deformed bush hog.
All right,
okay, have a good one.
You too. If you ever see one, let me know so we can go out there and capture it.
I told you they're out there.
But let me know, like on a specific night when you see them. We'll go out there and we'll catch them.
They chase the rabbits. See you later.
All right, see ya. I will definitely put on a rabbit costume if it will draw one out. He's mentioned that to us before that he's seen the puckwudgies, but I've never gone out there at night. Maybe I really should.
Yeah, maybe.
One of my favorites. Working in the newsroom here, we get a lot of interesting stuff over the scanner, and one of my favorite stories was a couple of months ago. There were some kids in Fall River that were trapped on a golf course after hours, and the police were trying to tell them to get off the golf course, but they refused to leave because the kids kept saying that they saw coyotes everywhere, that every time they tried to leave the golf course, there was coyotes blocking their way from getting off the golf course. So the police are yelling at them with the bullhorn, and they're like screaming back to them, but there's coyotes! But there were no coyotes. They were just high. That's what the cop said on the scanner anyway. Like, yeah, there's no coyotes. These kids are just smoking something. So, but...
Oh, that's funny.
But, I mean, that is what happens, though, is that stories can... Oh, we have another call coming in. Stories can pop up like that where all of a sudden it just takes one little, like the caller was mentioning about puckwudgies being something with a deformity, a deformed bush hog. It just takes one little weird thing like that to kind of kick off an entire wealth of stories of high strangeness.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Dover Demon, that story, I don't know if you're familiar with that. That's a kind of a Massachusetts legend, but a lot of people thought that was, the explanation they gave for it was a deformed baby moose. But
interesting.
Deformed baby mooses don't climb up rock walls. But hey, whatever. Let's take this other call here. Good evening. You're on Spooky South Coast with Dr. Kitta. How are you?
Oh, hi, I'm doing fine. This is Eric.
Hello.
Excuse me. I'm Professor Eric in live chat.
Hey, nice to hear from you.
I think that my field and Dr. Kitta's probably overlap a good bit. And since we're covering the paranormal tonight almost from A to Z, one thought I often have is that when we come across something we don't understand, we know that at least neurologically, our brains don't like ambiguity. So, if we have to, we sort of fill in the blanks. It's kind of a Gestalt sort of thing. We just, we do our best to connect the dots so that we have something and we can say, okay, now I understand it. And I'm wondering if you have to take that into consideration when you're doing your research, you're doing writing, interviewing people. Is that in the back of your mind?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, it absolutely is. The good part for me, I guess, the solution to this for me is a lot of my work. So I'm interested in why people tell the stories they tell, but I actually am not interested in literal truth, which is kind of weird to say. So even if somebody is lying to me, or even if they're experiencing something and they think that it's one thing and it might be actually like psychologically something else, they're still doing it within the context of the tradition. So they still understand, how to tell a good story. They still understand what parts are going to work and what don't work. So even in the situations where maybe I'm not getting the whole story, I'm still getting something that's culturally relevant. So it's still, from that perspective, it's still interesting to me. On a personal level, though, there are definitely times where I have my own sort of gut reaction where I'm like, okay, yeah, I don't know if I believe this entirely, or I think this person is messing with me, or, maybe it was something else. And that certainly happens to me, though, as a researcher, too.
Or maybe parts of it, seem cogent to what you're doing, and then the other parts, because, when I do counseling and when I'm working with students, there are times I feel like, these pieces make sense, and the other pieces I think you didn't have, you had a blank space there, and you needed to fill in the blank, and then that's how you completed your story.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of times we use terminology that we understand as a way of describing something that's like something else. And sometimes like turns into exactly like, you know what I mean? Sometimes when people are describing things, they'll say like, well, it was like this, but then that slowly kind of morphs into that as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And thank you for the call, Eric.
Yeah, thank you.
Great to hear a voice from the chat room there. And again, we highly encourage everybody to call in with questions during the show each week. But we always have a great conversation going on in the chat room. One of the great things, Dr. Kitta, you have to say is that with the proliferation now of, podcasts with people talking, this is folklore, and research into these stories is something that is very popular on the internet and is very popular with podcasters, with YouTubers. There's a lot of ways out there to get this information out that people are starting to talk about this stuff. And I don't mean just sharing the stories. I mean analyzing the stories and breaking them down and getting into the nuts and bolts of the whys.
Absolutely. And I think as folklorists, we love that. We love that people are getting engaged with us and that we can have these conversations. Because, we want to talk to people about this stuff. And we're the kind of, we're the kind of academics where we're like, hey, come talk to us about it. Come tell us your stories. Come take a class with us and learn more. And that happens all the time. I get people in my classes that are ghost hunters or who are people who are just interested. And I get skeptics, I get believers. And we welcome all of those people to come and talk about this. It's great that we're having these conversations.
Absolutely. Now, where can people find more of your work and keep in touch with you and follow along with everything that you do?
Oh, you can follow me personally on Twitter. I do tweet sometimes. I also, I'm on several podcasts, actually on and off lately. But also the American Folklore Society is a great it's a great resource. We're always open to talking to different people. There's also the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research. We love to talk to people. We have really small conferences where people can come and listen or just be a part of things or even present themselves. So we'd love to have more people come out and be engaged.
Well, we're still going to make sure that we have you back on the show because this has been a great discussion, and it was only the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more we can get in depth, and please keep us up to date with anything that you're working on that you think would be interesting for our audience.
Absolutely. Thanks so much again for having me. All
right. Thank you for coming on, and have a good Thanksgiving.
Okay, you too.
Take care. That is our guest, Dr. Andrea Kitta. Again, you can follow along with her online. We tweeted out some stuff from her earlier today, so you can follow along with her on Twitter as well. Matt, I think that what I want more than anything right now is I want a good story, a good piece of folklore to sit down and read for the rest of the night, and a giant Thanksgiving sandwich.
I agree.
That's all.
Does Sonic have Thanksgiving sandwiches?
They do not. As great as the
do they have a Thanksgiving sandwich shake?
They probably do. As great as the conversation was, like in the back of my mind, all I'm thinking of the whole time is a Thanksgiving sandwich too.
Right.
But yes, you had Sonic for the first time last week, and you enjoyed it.
It was fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah,
we didn't experience the car service, but
no,
we got roller service
at our table. So there's certainly, and I just became a member of the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research on Facebook. I just got approved, so the notice just came up.
Cool.
So yes, no, there's no Thanksgiving Sonic shake, but there's Thanksgiving pizzas at places. Did you ever notice that? Places are doing Thanksgiving pizzas,
huh? With
stuffing and turkey and stuff on.
That should be really good.
I'm iffy.
Yeah.
I'm iffy on it, but
Is it the cheese or
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it's all going to work.
cranberry sauce?
That's what I was
Is that
thinking.
what-
There must be at least a mixture of cranberry with it, or gravy. It could be gravy. Would that work? I don't know. We'll when we have a bunch of Thanksgiving leftovers. This is all stuff that we can try.
Right.
So if only we were still cooks, we could try it not on our own dimes. But since that's no longer the case, we'll have to pay for it. All right, so we will be back next week with another edition of Spooky South Coast. I think next week we'll be talking about Lizzie Borden. So something that we haven't talked about for a while. So you can tune in next Saturday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And, of course, streaming live on Spooky TV at SpookySouthCoast.com, as well as here on WBSM. And thank you to everybody who listens to us on the Dark Matter Radio Network as well. Truly honored to be a part of Art Bell's Dark Matter Radio Network. So however you get in touch with us, however you listen to the show, we'll see you next week, and we want you all to stay spooktacular.